Hello, welcome to Lazada Insider, featuring knowledge that makes a difference. We share trusted insights, forward looking perspectives, and exclusive expert interviews to keep you ahead of the curve.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Lazada Insider, knowledge that makes a difference. And today, I'm your host. I'm Janet Sarah New, and we're very glad to bring you the sustainability series. Today, we're going to talk about combating wildlife trafficking in Southeast Asia. So we know, from statistics, do you know that in Southeast Asia, we have actually about 20% of the global plant, animal, and marine species? But however, even despite that we have so much of this biodiversity population here, the region is also extremely vulnerable to illegal wildlife trafficking, and our endangered species are also at threat. What do we know in the last few years is that there has been still an increased number of wildlife trafficking happening in this region, despite the increased effort of awareness and increased actions in tackling this problem. So we want to learn more today. What has been done in this aspect? And what can businesses and people like you and me can do to contribute to addressing this problem? And we are very glad today. I would like to introduce you to our special guest, Liz from WWF-Singapore. She will be sharing some of this interesting work that has been done in this region, and to also share with us exactly what is wildlife trafficking. So here I want to introduce my speaker, Liz. Over to you. I would like you to share a little bit more about what is WWF-Singapore and what's your role. Conservation and science sounds really interesting. Tell us a little bit more.
Well, thanks, Janet. I'm very happy to be here. I'm the Director of Conservation and Science for WWF-Singapore. My name's Liz Clarke. WWF, for those who don't know, stands for the Worldwide Fund for Nature. And WWF-Singapore is part of the WWF network. WWF is one of the world's largest and most experienced independent conservation organizations. We have a mission that is to conserve nature and to reduce the most pressing threats to the diversity of life on Earth. And in Singapore, we do that through market transformation, through sustainable finance initiatives, through advocacy and education. And then we also support a number of projects to conserve and restore the planet across Southeast Asia. And some of the threats that the WWF Singapore office is tackling includes deforestation, overfishing, climate change, and of course, illegal wildlife trade.
Wow, that's a lot going on, and the mission is indeed really great. But I can just imagine how much challenges and hard work that goes behind that. Liz, could you share with us a little bit more? What exactly is illegal animal trafficking?
Yes, so illegal wildlife trade or animal trafficking is the trading of species of wild flora and fauna, so plants and animals, that are protected by national or international legislation without having the necessary permits or the permissions to do that trading. So the trade includes live animals and plants, as well as products made from these species. So, for example, many people will be familiar with elephant ivory, perhaps pangolin scales, rhino horn, tiger bone. These might be traded as ornaments, as pets, as food, or for their perceived medicinal value. And there is an international agreement between governments to ensure that the trade in wild animals and plants doesn't threaten the survival of species. And that's called CITES, which stands for the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. And it lists some 37,000 species which have special conditions in terms of whether or not they can be traded and under which circumstances. And locally here in Singapore, we have the Endangered Species Act. That's our national legislation, which in turn legally prohibits the trade of certain CITES listed species of wildlife without having a valid permit. I think it's also important to note that there are also endangered wildlife species that are legally traded because they're not currently protected by any legislation. And there's a lot of work by legislators with scientists to review the listing of animals under CITES. But it's very important to flag up that it's not just it's not just an issue with the legal wildlife trade, but also with the legal wildlife trade of species that are threatened with extinction.
Right, that's a very extensive list of coverage in CITES in the policy. Would you say CITES you reckon that CITES is one of the highest standard in terms of if any organization would like to follow in terms of animal wildlife protection, that would be a policy or a standard that you should follow?
Absolutely, it's a really important international agreement. You know, at the moment, people might be following the conference on climate change. You also have a conference on biodiversity. And then you have these international agreements such as CITES, which is an incredibly important forum for the world's experts to congregate and to work with governments around the world, policymakers and legislators, to make sure that we all agree internationally on which species should be protected and therefore not traded. So it's an incredibly important forum and hub and agreement.
Very, very knowledgeable, and I learned something from you, Liz, about CITES, because I remember when I first came on board on Lazada about a year ago now, one of my first team that I interacted with was the venture risk team, and they have the responsibility to develop the policies and the risk management system using technology and AI to work on detecting any of the illegal products or categories. And one of them is actually on wildlife and even including plants. So it's not just like about animals. So a lot of times we think about trafficking, we think about animals straight away, but plants could be also trafficked. And I recall that we're also following this CITES. I think that would be the standard. So I'm very glad to know that our team here has also referred to the same standard in terms of setting our boundaries on how we can, as a start, manage prohibited items. But I would like to dive in a little bit more as you share with us in terms of illegal animal trafficking. We know that it's a negative thing. We don't want that to happen. But just from your standpoint as the Director of Conservation and Science, could you share with us more about what are the negative consequences of trafficking, animal trafficking? How does this impact our society and our environment?
Right, excellent question. So, as a conservationist, the scale is in itself very concerning. So, in just 1 year, literally hundreds of millions of plants and animals are caught or harvested from the wild, and simply put, the demand is placing far too much pressure on nature, animals and plants. You know, we're approaching 8 billion humans on Earth, and in comparison, there's maybe less than 500,000 African elephants left, less than 30,000 African rhinos, 4,000 tigers in Asia. So if you do the math, it only takes a tiny percentage of the human population to literally drive other species to extinction in terms of demand for animal products derived from them. And there's a reason that there is an incredibly long list of species for which it's illegal to trade. And it's because it is quite literally threatening the survival of a great many endangered species. So as I said earlier, there's some 37,000 species just currently listed by CITES, let alone the other species that are under consideration for listing. And that is part of a deeply alarming trend that we're seeing globally. So since the 1970s, data has shown that biodiversity, so the population size of animal and plant species on Earth has plummeted. According to our Living Planet report, some 68% on average, we've seen a decline in the populations of mammals, birds, fish, amphibians, and reptiles. And why is that? Well, the main reason is habitat loss and degradation, but the second most important factor driving all these species to extinction and driving down population numbers is illegal wildlife trade. So it's overexploitation and overharvesting. And that's the wildlife, that's the direct impact that we see. But your question that you posed has another dimension to it. So what is, in addition to it being a kind of tragedy of human neglect for other living organisms on the planet, the impacts themselves are even further reaching. So if you take in developing nations, for example, many people will depend heavily on the availability of natural resources and wildlife for their daily survival. And so if the trade continues to the extent that it's going on, then we see a real risk to the livelihoods of people. Without healthy populations of wildlife, we also lose the ecosystem integrity and the ecosystem services that they provide. So the food, the timber, the medicine, the climate regulation that wildlife provides our planet and human needs is seriously compromised. Another issue that doesn't a lot of people I think aren't aware about is that the illegal trade in wildlife is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and that means it involves organized crime groups. In fact, it's the world's fourth most lucrative crime, with an estimated value of some $23 billion a year. So, in turn, that means it's undermining the governing rule of law and threatening peace and security in many countries. So the impacts are really very far-reaching. And I suppose one final point to make is very pertinently today. We're talking over a teleconference call rather than in person, and the reason we're doing that is because of the global pandemic we're facing right now, and to respect social distancing. And it's commonly believed by the scientific community that illegal wildlife trade is a direct driver of zoonotic diseases such as COVID-19. So then you have that link again between illegal wildlife trade and zoonotic disease and pandemics, such as we're all experiencing as a planet right now.
Yeah. So what we're hearing, so a lot of times we could, day to day, we feel that the animals belong to the animal world, and then we stay in our own people world, right? But in reality, the wildlife, the animals, plants, and humans, we have to coexist.
That's right.
It's not a one or another. That's what I'm kind of hearing is that we shouldn't forget the dimension that we are not separate, right?
That's right. And our survival depends on wildlife survival
also,
as well.
Exactly. And they also depend on us, the humans, in terms of how we conduct our activities daily, right? I'm very curious, just like for our audience as well, because we're based out of Singapore and in Southeast Asia. Could you share with us which are the animals or plants that are the most trafficked in this region? Yeah.
So yeah, that's another good question. So here in Southeast Asia, this is what we call a biodiversity hotspot, which means we're home to an amazing variety of wildlife and species that can't be found anywhere else in the world. But it also means that we are a major hub, unfortunately, for illegal wildlife trade. And Southeast Asia is both a source for threatened wildlife that is trafficked, but also a cause of the demand for that trafficking. So we demand a lot of these species. And if we take a species as an example, if we take the pangolin, so I don't know how many people are familiar with the pangolin. It's sometimes referred to as the scaly anteater. Do Google it because it's a beautiful animal. This is often referred to as the world's most trafficked species. In 2019, the haul of pangolin seizures involved a total of some 155,000 kilograms of pangolin products. So the scale is enormous, and that's just what is seized, what the authorities are able to identify, which is likely just the tip of the iceberg. And historically, that's been here in Asia. That's been mainly Asian species of pangolin, so from India, Malaysia, and Nepal. But what we've been finding is from specialists is that the demand for pangolin scales and the declining population of Asian pangolins has resulted in a shift to demand for African pangolins being poached. Here in Singapore in 2019, more than 25,000 kilograms of African pangolin scales were intercepted here that were meant to be shipped on to Vietnam and Nigeria. So, and the stark reality of this is that pangolins are at risk of total extinction in 20 years if these kinds of rates exist. So I'd say the pangolin is a key species, but there are, many other species that we come through. In Asia, people who like birds, for example, the helmeted hornbill is a very beautiful bird. Here in Singapore, we have the pied oriental hornbill that a lot of people recognize. Well, it's relative, the helmeted hornbill, is highly prized in the legal wildlife trade for its famous bill. And, we, again, in terms of tracking it, there's some 3,000 helmeted hornbill parts and products have been seized in Asia between 2010 and 2019. So, you get these sort of staggering figures, but again, it's just sort of chipping away, tip of the iceberg.
Yeah. And also this leads to the next point, like your role in WWF or the whole organization, like your mission at WWF is so critical in addressing a lot of this conservation and wildlife protection. I'd love to hear a little bit more in terms of addressing and tackling the illegal wildlife trafficking. What are some of the activities or research and work that you're focusing, your priority this year?
Yeah, so WWF, we work in lots of different ways. So some of the key roles that we play, we bring the crisis to light, we raise public and private sector awareness, we provide expertise via our staff to inform policy and its implementation, or to inform online retailers such as Lazada. And it's, of course, not just us. We often work in partnership. There are many other organizations working together, from civil society to business, including the shipping sector, to finance, and, of course, government and law enforcers. And, some of the ways, some of the more specific initiatives that we have. So, for example, many people might be familiar with the fact that there is an ivory ban coming in, which is a major step forward here in Singapore. Came into force September of 2021, so this year. And it's something that Singapore should be very proud of, that prohibits the sale and display of ivory in Singapore, a zero tolerance approach. Because unless we send that signal, then we're not going to cut the demand down, and poaching will continue. So it's a very significant measure that the Singaporean government has taken. And organizations like WWF, we helped with that and supported that in terms of the Ivory Lane campaign that we ran, where we set up a fake online store, which I think really shocked and provoked public awareness that trade can still happen, or at the time could still happen, and indeed does around the world. I think a lot of people also don't realize that some of the products that they see are actually derived from animal plants to begin with, but don't necessarily make that connection. So in terms of our support to, we're committed to supporting NParks and others in their mission and their enforcement of CITES and the law. We also run other initiatives. So we have a Cyber Spotters program, where it's a citizen science volunteer program that trains a select number of volunteers who can help us identify and report illegal wildlife trade listings, including online. And we're also part of a coalition, which I'm really pleased that Lazada has very recently joined as the first Singaporean online retailer to come on board and join the coalition to end wildlife trafficking online. And this is a partnership between e-commerce companies and NGOs in order to work together to remove illegal wildlife trade from their platforms.
Yeah, you mentioned that there's so many aspects, right, in terms of like combating wildlife trafficking. It's not a one-dimensional effort or program that can stop that. I think I learned from you about we need to tackle this from the government, from the legislation and law to help with the regulations. And then there's also the other aspect where you work on consumers, on the public, how you can get involved, and also having a deeper understanding, because they end up being the consumers, right? If they don't have the demand or they fight against the supply, then hopefully that could also push the other direction against wildlife trafficking, because there's no demand for it. And then
Right.
the last that you mentioned is how do you like from WWF's like to engage from the private sector, especially whether it's tech companies or different industries that you have engaged with. It's also leveraging on the corporate know-how and their network to further help to amplify on their effort and their commitment. I'm also really curious, like, because you mentioned about to WWF. Also for Lazada, I think it's a really amazing partnership. Like we have never done this before. It's like our first partnership with NGOs and especially with wildlife. So I'm very curious to hear from you as a scientist, as a conservationist. How do you see platforms and technology playing a critical part in helping to tackle or reduce online trafficking?
Mm. Yes, so I mean, as we discussed earlier on,
Mm,
a lot of the illegal wildlife trade, it seems to be shifting online, and
mm,
it creates this whole new level of difficulties and complications for those who are trying to prevent illegal wildlife trade and the extinction of the species that are associated with that trade. So
mm,
having the support and the cooperation of e-commerce platforms such as Lazada is really very critical. So from our perspective, from an NGO perspective, we see our position and our role as bringing that knowledge and that expertise and that awareness to the e-commerce sector. But in return, we rely as well on the expertise in e-commerce in terms of some of the ways in which illegal wildlife traders might be operating. So some of the things we see, for example, is changing, key search words or
mm-hmm.
search terms, for example.
Yeah.
We need that kind of technical expertise that comes from the e-commerce sector to help us understand what the trends are. Be able to understand how significant the scale is of online trade, some of the
Mm-hmm.
tricks that are being used, and some of the what might be being exposed
Mm,
through traders. And there are a lot of lessons learned from e-commerce platforms in dealing, for example, on other issues
mm,
that e-commerce traders are dealing with, that they can bring and they can apply specifically to the issue of illegal wildlife trade with the support of WWF and other civil society organizations and scientists.
And through this coalition, what I've noticed is that even though businesses could be competing, but they could all be in the same coalition. So this coalition today, I think it has more than 40 of the biggest tech and social media companies, right, including Lazada and also our parent company, Alibaba Group, and lots of the MNCs around the world. So I'm also noticing with the keywords that possibly we may not be able to share before. We could now, through WWF being the neutral party and also the knowledge partner, to be the custodian of this really, like, I think is a really precious and valuable database of keywords. And I think like in the last 6 months that we have started this partnership. We have, I think WWF has run a round of a cyber spotter program, and through that has helped us to sift out, I think, close to 60 illegal wildlife listings. So it passed on to the risk detection team, and we were able to put it into the algorithm system with the keywords and be able to filter out all this at a very, very early stage and remove the listings before they could even be posted online or as any sales could be made. So I think that kind of collaboration at the industry level, it's like really what I have learned from you is that WWF or like maybe other civil society groups like that, you have the power of convening because of your neutral stance and your deep knowledge in terms of the specific aspects in the environment or for wildlife that you could really bring together this movement and bring about a larger scale transformation that is much needed in tackling such a complex problem. So I look forward to this partnership that we just started. I think it's just the very beginning of what we could possibly collaborate together on the technology front, and how we can at the same time count on organizations like WWF to be fighting on the front line every day on these issues, right? Then just coming to the end of our podcast and our show, I think for our audience here, they might think, yeah, we're just regular people. I care about this issue. I love animals, but what can I do? Like, at least you have some tips for anyone, like maybe our colleagues, their kids who have heard about this, they want to take part. What would you tell them they can do and take action today to protect wildlife and protect our species? Yeah.
Yeah. I think just, the key thing is making informed decisions when you're purchasing things online and in person as well.
Yeah.
I think, as I highlighted earlier, I think often there's a lack of awareness around, like I said, the scale of products that are available online and whether or not they are, illegal to begin with. It's as a consumer myself, as we all are consumers, it can be very difficult to navigate. So I would encourage people to, educate yourselves in terms of looking for sources online. And if you want to look at WWF online as well, we have materials available, and as does here in Singapore, NParks and others, to help understand which products are illegal. And to understand a bit more about the crisis in terms of illegal wildlife trade. You can also spread the news with friends and family about the issue. And if you're really keen as well, we do have a Cyber Spotters program. So if you want to come and be a detective online and help Lazada and other e-commerce platforms and WWF and other NGOs in terms of tracking illegal wildlife trade and reporting it and stamping it out, do reach out to us and do look up Cyber Spotters.
That sounds really fun, Liz. It's you get a chance to be a cybercrime fighter online. Yeah. So we're definitely everyone who's hearing this, if you are interested in the next round to become a cyber spotter, do contact WWF after our show today. Yeah, and also you can look up more also on Lazada website, that we have also made it available to help people understand what are the policies around wildlife trafficking, and I think more importantly, what are the products or the plants that are constituted as illegal for wildlife trafficking. So our policy team has made an effort to put it up to our sellers so that they are able to also understand this issue a lot more. I hope we have the chance in the future where we can develop more of this education and awareness kind of programs or workshops. I think there's really that part that you said, the knowledge is so critical for as a consumer, right, to be informed, and then we can make the right decision after that. And thank you so much, Liz, for your time today. I've learned so much about this, and I feel hopeful again because there's so much different people working from different fronts every day to take care of issues that we may not be able to tackle on a day-to-day basis with wildlife protection. So thank you, audience, for listening to our podcast. Once again, this is Lazada Insider, knowledge that makes a difference. I hope you tune in again for our next episode on sustainability. Thank you very much. I'm Janet Serrano, your host for today. Bye, everybody.
This is Lazada Insider. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure you click follow and subscribe so you don't miss our latest insights and expert interviews. Thanks again for joining us. Until next time, take care. Lazada.